At the beginning of this year, I had the crazy idea to create an entire WEBTOON series in just 3 months. And to be clear, I've never tried to make a series in such a short time, and this caused a lot of complications later on. But first, let's talk about the beginning of this whole journey, January of 2025. When I first started working out the concept for this new series. So first, I wrote down all the ideas I could think of relating to this new series into a note-taking app called Milanote, which I definitely recommend that you use for your own projects. And my first initial idea of this was something like a memory erasing object. I thought of these purple flowers that might have the power to erase memories and grow in the world that all these characters are living in. Then my second thought was to bring back some old ideas that I've had before, one of which was part of my unfinished comic from 2 years ago. The idea in that comic that I was making was that there was somehow an alternate fantasy universe which the main character finds herself in by accident. And then I merged the two ideas and came up with this. The main character is trapped in the real world and unable to remember the time she once spent in the alternate universe that exists. So I had the idea that the whole beginning of the WEBTOON series would be her slowly remembering what she had forgotten and piecing together clues about her past. But eventually, as she's slowly remembering more and more, she'll remember something shocking. But before I get into that, let's talk about my early concept art. First, I was sketching out my ideas for the main characters using a bunch of reference photos for ideas. I started by sketching out my main character. I wanted her to be kind of young and innocent looking, but also have a strong side to her as well. Her outfit was largely inspired by the idea of a traveler, who in this case travels constantly between 2 different realms. And I wanted there to be another character that is from the alternate world and is friends with the main character, who comes into the real world to help the main character when she's trapped. The friend would help the main character to remember her past and then fill her in on what's going on. So then I started designing the second character, which is this friend that I was talking about. I wanted him to be an elf in the alternate universe because I felt like that would suit the personality that I wanted him to have. I want him to be kind of protective, like an older brother to the main character, so I made him a little older looking than her in the first sketch. I also had the idea to give him white blonde hair after seeing an artwork of an elf that looked like that, and I also made it on the longer side. And my idea for his weapon of choice in the fantasy world was a bow and arrow to go with his whole fantasy elf design. And once I had a sketch for the main character's friend, I moved on to the main antagonist of the story. So far we know that the main character had her memories erased from her and is trapped in the real world. But what we don't know yet is that there was someone behind all of this who caused our main character to forget everything. And that person is the antagonist that wants to keep the main character trapped in the real world forever. When I was sketching out my idea for the antagonist's appearance, I wanted to show some of his personality through his design. I have him wearing a very polished outfit, which is meant to reflect who he is and what he cares about. For his personality, I wanted him to be prideful, power-hungry, and a little selfish. He cursed the main character and sent her back to the other dimension because he didn't want her to be able to stop him from achieving the power that he wants. But he wasn't always the way that he is at this point in the story. He became corrupted by the power he gained, and maybe the main character is the only person who has the ability to take away his power, and so he cursed her. Now that we have the 3 main characters, I moved on to the next part in the planning process, more world building. Since the first realm is basically just the world we all live in currently, there wasn't much world building needed for that one. So I mainly focused on the fantasy universe. I want there to be a magic system in place, which we need in order to have the main character be cursed. So that was the first thing that I started working on. I had this idea that the magic in this world doesn't come directly from the people living in it. Instead, it comes from special objects that are in this world. The most useful magical objects are weapons, but there are also many other types of objects that hold magical power, including flowers that have the ability to erase memories. And there is a way to be able to channel the magic directly through a person. But if you do that, it comes at a cost. So I thought maybe the antagonist tried to do this in order to gain more power, and as a result, the magic has completely corrupted him. There's a lot more to what happened to the antagonist, but I won't say anything else so you don't have the plot spoiled for you. Anyway, now that I knew how people use magic, I had to come up with the rules for what you can and can't do with this magic. I thought of going with the classic elemental system, but I decided to do something slightly different instead. I'll talk more about the system another time, but for now let's talk about the places that the story takes place in. I sketched out some concept art of each of the main locations in both universes, one of which is an old abandoned temple from the fantasy world. This temple is the first place introduced in the WEBTOON, and it's where the main character was cursed and the place she keeps having memories of. And as well as the temple scene, I also designed concept art for many other places, one of which is the main character's bedroom, which is where a lot of scenes in the first few episodes will take place. This is because the main character will be slowly remembering things from her forgotten past. starting with her dreams. I also planned out the school, the streets, and the different types of landscapes in the fantasy universe. On a side note, I drew some quick logo ideas for the series, and let me know what you think of them in the comments. And then once I had finished planning the concept, I started mapping out each episode. First, I wrote a quick outline of the first few episodes. Then I read out everything I wanted to happen panel by panel. I won't spend too much time focusing on this part because there isn't much for you to look at while I'm talking, so after that I took a break to make the two thumbnails for the series. I need a vertical and a square thumbnail, and I started with the square one. I wanted the thumbnail to be a close-up of the main character. I also wanted to incorporate the magical flowers that I mentioned before, so I drew them all around her and in her hair. I used thinner, more clean line art to look more finished. I probably spent the most effort on the thumbnails because they're the first impression that you're going to get of the series, and I want them to be eye-catching. To make it stand out, I used bright colors such as the bright purple flowers and the main character's vibrant hair. I used a lot of finishing and rendering techniques that I mentioned in past videos, so if you want to know how to make your art finish like this, then check out my tutorials. So now that I have some nice thumbnails, it was time to work on the actual episodes. The first step is to draw storyboards. For those of you who don't know, storyboards are like rough sketches that map out your idea for the panels. I sketched out the angle, pose, and panel placement for each scene. As you can see, the storyboard can be as rough as you want as long as you can understand it yourself. Most of the time, I didn't even draw hair close, just their expressions and poses. Then, after the storyboard was finished, it was time for the cleanup sketch and line art. Whether I do a cleanup sketch depends on the level of detail of the sketch. If it's already cleaner, I'll just go in and do line art, but if it's too messy, I'll start by drawing another sketch. I increased the stabilization on the brush I was using for line art and made use of the line weight variation. And finally, I go in one last time to color everything and add lighting. I used a different brush for this step because the other one is too transparent for this purpose. In case you want to know, I used a calligraphy brush from Procreate. And I also have all of the color palettes for the characters and backgrounds saved, so all that I needed to do was select from those. I kept having to look back at the character sheets while making the episodes, but after a little while I probably won't have to do this because I'll be able to remember everything as I get more practice drawing these characters. Then for the lighting, I also have a color palette for that, and I just applied it on a new layer set to multiply. And sometimes for more important scenes, I spent more time on it by rendering a little bit. Rendering is just when I go on a new layer on top of everything to clean things up and add more detail. I did this for both the last panel in episode 2 and another close-up panel in the same episode. The last thing that I did was import everything into Ibis Paint to add text and speech bubbles. Then once I finished the episodes, it was time to post, and this is where things started getting complicated. I kept trying to upload everything into the WEBTOON website, but it kept telling me the file size was too large. I was so confused because I had tried everything I could think of to get the file size down. I even tried to resize the panel several times. And I was getting really worried at this point because I was on a time limit and I needed to finish this that day. So as a last resort, I decided to change the file type. And to my surprise, it actually ended up working. Before I changed file types, I was uploading everything as a PNG, but what worked for me was to change it to JPG or JPEG. And then after 3 months of hard work, my webtoon was finally published. If you're interested in reading it, it's called Don't Forget Me on WEBTOON. But before you go and check it out, click the video in the top right corner if you want to know how to design good characters for your next project.